Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for waking up with us here at Live Now from Fox on this Monday, September 29th. I'm your host, Carel, and I'll be with you throughout the next several hours, continuing to guide you through the day's top stories, showcasing live events and live looks from around the world. And right now, we do want to start our morning with some of these international headlines, but also that have a tie to the United States here. Now, just days after his defiant speech at the United Nations rejecting demands to end the war in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is set to meet with his most important supporter. Today's meeting with President Trump in Washington comes at a tenuous moment. Israel is increasingly isolated, losing support from many countries that were long its steadfast allies. And at home, the Prime Minister's governing coalition appears more fragile than ever, and the White House is showing signs of impatience. All of that courtesy of some of the reporting from the Associated Press. Now, joining us now to discuss this and preview the meeting between both of those world leaders is Edmund Fitton-Brown. He is a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Edmund, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So really the focus does continue to be this war in Gaza and the fact that a lot of these allies to Israel, they're showing their disapproval for how it's being handled. Last week, we saw several of these leaders talking at the United Nations General Assembly, Western countries already recognizing the state of Palestine. So really, what are the challenges that President Trump faces today with this meeting with the Prime Minister?
I think it's a huge meeting, this one, because after the General Assembly, Trump has created a situation in which there is a peace plan. And this has been discussed last week with the Arab and Muslim leaders. It's been discussed with Prime Minister Netanyahu as well. And so the question is, can President Trump now put pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to recognize that this is a moment where he needs to move forward?
And then just to recap a bit here for our viewers, let's talk about this peace plan that was proposed by President Trump. What are some of the key points and possibly the timeline included?
So an immediate ceasefire is the most, that would be the very first thing that would happen. But in addition to that, you would have the release of all of the hostages and the remains of deceased hostages very shortly after that. And then you get into the more complicated things, which are to do with a timeline towards a Palestinian state. Now, that would be conditional, and it's not at all clear that that would necessarily be in the near future. But you would have a transitional authority would be appointed. And you would then start to look at things like reconstruction aid and who would provide security, who would be in charge in that period. So the question here is, can Benjamin Netanyahu sell this to his coalition back home? Because he has people in his very fragile coalition who are against any kind of movement towards a Palestinian state. Now, President Trump has said a number of things which are difficult for those Israeli hardliners, including the fact that they cannot annex the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, as the Israelis call it. And so the question immediately arises, what does Prime Minister Netanyahu do? Does he face down the hardliners in his coalition in order to move forward in lockstep with President Trump? Or does he try to change what President Trump is offering? And some people are saying that perhaps his approach will be to try to buy time and to get adjustments to the plan.
We're taking a live look here over at the Israel-Gaza border there. No activity at this time, very into the afternoon over on that side of the world. But Edmund, it's interesting how when you outlined this plan, you mentioned almost the simple part in the beginning, which is that immediate ceasefire and also the return of all of the hostages. But this has been something that has been requested and they have been working toward for years now. So why have they not been able to accomplish that if it really is that immediate goal?
Well, I think that the important point here, and this, of course, is the thing that may slow down any kind of progress, is that Hamas has been absolutely inflexible and intransigent and has refused a number of previous plans that have been proposed. So in the sense, they've always given Prime Minister Netanyahu cover because the United States has agreed to hold Hamas responsible for the failure to reach a ceasefire, because a ceasefire without the immediate, sorry, I shouldn't say immediate, but the very quickly following release of all of the hostages and hostage remains, that would be a victory for Hamas. And so Hamas have wanted to hold on to some of the hostages because they want to hold on to their last remaining leverage.
So what makes us think at this moment in time that, given the fact that Hamas has been so inflexible up to this point, that things could actually change?
Well, I think we can't be sure of that because, of course, almost all of the key diplomacy that has taken place in the last week or 10 days has been taking place in New York. And it's been involving parties who are states, not Hamas. And so the question is, has Hamas sufficiently changed its position to allow the pressure to move on to Prime Minister Netanyahu? And we don't know the answer to that.
Speaking of New York, I want to take us out to this live image that we have of the Statue of Liberty. Today, the United Nations General Assembly does continue. Let's go back to talk a little bit more about Benjamin Netanyahu's support back home within his coalition, and also, Edmund, the challenges that he's facing to try to get these proposals past them. Talk to me. What is the biggest pushback that he is receiving, and from who?
So he's getting pushback from both sides. And I talked about the hardliners in his coalition at home. You have to remember he had to fight a series of general elections recently. And all of those general elections were, we could say, inconclusive. They led to situations in which he briefly lost power. But in all cases, it was on a knife's edge. And therefore, whatever came out of those elections was always a very precarious coalition. So at the moment, he heads a precarious coalition. And in it, the National Security Minister and the Finance Minister are both hardliners, and they've said that they will not countenance any kind of relaxation of Israel's position, and they won't countenance any kind of mention of a Palestinian state. So that's the pressure from the right, if you like. The main pressure that he faces from the other side, or if you like, from the Israeli population at large, is about the hostage release. And that is the suspicion that people have that Benjamin Netanyahu wants the war to continue for his own reasons, rather than to prioritize getting the remaining hostages home. And of course, it looks as if the 21-point plan that President Trump is proposing is an opportunity to get all of the hostages or their remains home.
I want to go back to some of these addresses that we heard from both Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and also President Trump last week at the United Nations. And the fact that several delegates that were in attendance actually got up and walked out ahead of this address. You can see it in this video here, that address specifically from the Prime Minister there. How big of a deal is it that not only did you have all of these delegates walk out during that address, but also we have seen several of these Western countries recognize the Palestinian state?
I think the second is a bigger deal than the first. The first is sort of UN General Assembly gesture politics, and really reminds me of, a bunch of overgrown student activists, that sort of walking out. They didn't walk out during Russian speeches. They didn't walk out during Iranian speeches. So there's a long history in the General Assembly of targeting Israel for that kind of gesture. It's frustrating, but it's something that the Israelis and the West are used to. And by the way, it was interesting to see, and actually somewhat gratifying to see, that not everybody did walk out. And so the United Arab Emirates, who of course are part of the Arab and Islamic bloc in the United Nations, but they're also part of the Abraham Accords with Israel. They did not walk out. They stayed. They remained seated throughout his speech, and they were very respectful of his speaking. So that was good. The recognition of a Palestinian state by a number of Western countries, of whom the leading ones were the United Kingdom, France, Canada, and Australia. That was more worrying because those are, first of all, they're all close allies of the United States, and they took this action against American advice. They're also close allies on an intelligence level with Israel. And so this has frustrated the Israelis, and they feel that it's a poor recognition of the fact that Israel has been regularly providing intelligence that has been helping these countries to stay safe against Iranian subversion and violence. And so the other point is that Britain and France are permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. And the United Nations Security Council, of course, is the part of the UN that does serious business. And when it passes resolutions, they have international legal effect. So all of this shows that the global pressure on Israel is mounting. Now, the United States continues to have Israel's back, but it does mean that Benjamin Netanyahu needs to take Donald Trump very seriously indeed. He needs to calculate carefully and not to disrespect the objectives of the United States that he is going to hear today.
Edmund Fitton-Brown, a senior fellow for the Foundation of Defense of Democracies. We appreciate your time this morning here at Live Now from Fox as we preview this very important meeting between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. You take care.
Thank you.
We do want to step away for a quick commercial break. Before I do so, I want to bring up a post courtesy of Fox News here. They include a photo of both of those world leaders, and it says this, quoting President Trump, "We will get it done." President Trump announces a possible breakthrough in Middle East negotiations, saying all are on board ahead of his meeting with Netanyahu at the White House on Monday.